Today, we're diving into the story of one man's fight to save his home of 20 years. And this is a case that, believe it or not, starts with a simple no, and then just spirals into this incredible battle against the entire foreclosure machine.
And this is the man at the center of it all, Jeremy Bass. This quote from him, wow, it gets right to the heart of his struggle. He claims this whole thing didn't start because he missed a payment, but because he took a stand. And then in the end, he was punished for trying to do the right thing.
So here's the central puzzle, the real head-scratcher of this case. How can a person's legal arguments be described on the record as logical and sound by the other side's lawyer, and yet get thrown out by a higher court as completely frivolous? We're going to unpack that huge disconnect. Okay, let's go back to the very beginning. According to Bass, this entire nightmare kicked off when he was allegedly asked to sign backdated mortgage contracts. He says he was even offered a bribe to do it, and he refused.
He argues that this one decision, just that simple choice to say no, set off a devastating chain reaction. It started a legal process that would consume years of his life and put the only home he'd known for 2 decades on the line. I mean, it really makes you wonder, what is the cost of standing your ground, and does anybody even notice?
So what happened right after that? Well, once he said no, it was like a switch was flipped, and this big, impersonal machine of a non-judicial foreclosure just roared to life.
And you can see from the court records, that machine moves fast. Boom, a notice of default. 6 months later, a trustee's sale. The very next month, a new deed gets recorded. And then finally, a lawsuit to kick him out of his own house. It's just a clear, procedural, step-by-step path.
Now, from the court's point of view, and for the new owners, this whole thing was pretty cut and dried. The records showed a default, the foreclosure process seemed to follow the law, and here's the key part. The final lawsuit to remove him was only about one thing: who owns the house right now? Any of his arguments about how they got the title, well, that was all considered irrelevant to that specific question. But Bass, he didn't see it that way at all. He decided to fight back, arguing that the entire foundation of the foreclosure was rotten from the very start. The problem was, he had to do it all by himself.
And he wasn't representing himself because he wanted to. He actually came up with this term for it: perforce pro se. Basically, being forced to be your own lawyer after getting turned down by over 100 law firms, most of whom said they had conflicts of interest.
His main claim was an absolute bombshell. He alleged that the so-called public auction of his home wasn't public at all. He said the winning bidder worked with the trustee beforehand, and he pointed to what he called proof. The winning bid was a cashier's check for the exact amount owed, down to the last penny. He argued that's just statistically impossible without insider info. Now check this out. This quote is wild. It's from the actual court transcript, and it's not from a supporter or a friend. It's from an attorney for a co-defendant in the case, the opposing side, admitting on the record that Bass's reasoning had real merit, even if he didn't sound like a typical lawyer.
So, you've got the opposing counsel calling his arguments logical and sound. So how did the appeals court see it? Well, the judgment they handed down tells a very, very different story.
The court didn't just disagree with him, they completely dismissed his entire effort. They ruled his appeal was frivolous, which is legal speak for saying it had zero basis in fact or law. The substance of what he was saying was essentially made invisible.
Then they went after the presentation. They actually criticized the way his legal brief looked, claiming he used some unknown font that was hard to read. They made the document itself a problem.
And then came maybe the most incredible claim. They dismissed his research with a pretty shocking accusation, suggesting his detailed case summaries weren't even his own work, but looked like they were spit out by artificial intelligence.
But this is where the story takes a turn, because this slide just perfectly illustrates the huge gap between what was said and what was real. Bass had receipts. To fight the AI accusation, he showed he'd spent over $23,000 on LexisNexis, the same top-tier research tool all the big law firms use. And for the unknown font, he had a receipt for a licensed copy of Times New Roman, the exact font required by the court's own rules.
So let's step away from the legal back and forth for a second. What's the final toll here? What is the actual human cost of a fight like this, especially when you feel like no one is even seeing you, let alone hearing you?
Well, first, and obviously the most devastating, is the home itself. All the equity built up over 2 decades, an estimated $200,000, just gone.
Then you've got the money he spent just for the chance to be heard. To get himself the same professional tools a lawyer would use, he shelled out over $23,000 out of his own pocket.
And then in just a final, brutal twist, because his appeal was called frivolous, the court sanctioned him. He was ordered to pay the legal fees for the very people who now owned his home, a penalty of around $20,000.
But, the damage goes way beyond money. The foreclosure, the legal battle, it's all destroyed his credit. It's very likely he'll never be able to own a home again. That's a financial scar that lasts a lifetime. And so, you're left looking at this whole mess with a really fundamental question. When a man makes arguments that his own opponent calls logical, but the court calls frivolous, when he follows the rules to the letter but is accused of cheating, who did the system actually work for here? Who is really seen? And after all of this, will anyone even care? Do you?